Welcome to the Women's Interfaith Network's Refugee Week discussion, Time to Talk Refugees, Gender and the Refugee Experience, where we'll be talking with Westminster Befriend families Maria Makri about the specific challenges and experiences of refugee women. I'm Maeve Carlin, the Development and Communications Assistant at the Women's Interfaith Network. The figure of the refugee, who they are, what they represent for us, how we respond to them both nationally and internationally, is never far from the headlines and is frequently the focus of heated political debates. All too often, we project our political and cultural anxieties onto refugee communities, or they become a vehicle for political tribalism. However, the need for a meaningful and international response to refugees is both real and pressing. According to data from the UN High Commission for Refugees, as of mid-2021, there were 84 million forcibly displaced people worldwide and 26.6 million refugees. The responsibility of hosting and resettling these communities falls disproportionately on developing countries, where 85% of the world's refugee population resides. As Amnesty International stresses, the world urgently needs a new global plan to respond to this evolving and ongoing humanitarian crisis. The theme of displacement is discussed in many sacred texts, from the Hindu epic of the Ramayana to the Hijra of the Prophet Muhammad and his companions, or the flight of Mary and Joseph with the infant Jesus. Sacred texts also call believers to show compassion to society's outliers and the most vulnerable, and this is something we see in many of our members here at WIN, whether it's providing vaccinations to undocumented people or supporting local refugee populations to integrate into the wider community. It is essential to recognise the way that gender shapes and complicates the refugee experience and the particular challenges and vulnerabilities of refugee women. Throughout their migration journey, women are at risk of sexual and economic exploitation, with 1 in 5 refugee women experiencing sexual violence, although the real figure is likely to be significantly higher. Women are, of course, more likely to have caretaking responsibilities, and refugee women are no different, adding an additional burden in a precarious situation. Displaced women and girls also have limited access to education and healthcare, making pregnant and neonatal women particularly vulnerable. Despite these challenges, and although they constitute at least 50% of the refugee population, refugee women are rarely specifically targeted in humanitarian appeals and projects. Still, to quote a statement from UN Women marking 2016's World Refugee Day, women and girl refugees have an enormous capacity for resilience and the potential to become powerful agents of change. Quick to mobilise in times of crisis and often highly skilled, these women represent an overlooked but critical demographic that could contribute $1.4 trillion to the global economy, according to estimates from Women for Women International. Their voices are also crucial in developing any meaningful and sustainable response to our ongoing refugee crisis, and we'll hear today from Maria, who has experienced this firsthand in her work. Today's conversation will explore how we in the women's sector, as well as in faith and interfaith spaces, can be better allies to refugee women, as well as hear the key takeaways that those doing the vital work in this area want us to know. I'll now introduce our wonderful speaker, Maria Makri. Maria Makri grew up in Athens, Greece, where she completed a degree in journalism. Her passion for documenting human rights violation stories led her to London for an MA in documentary filmmaking in 2010. During that time, she honed her interest in refugee matters. For the past 10 years, she has been volunteering and working in charity organisations supporting asylum seekers and refugees. She has worked for several years as a casework coordinator, supporting survivors of torture, individuals experiencing severe trauma, and women who have survived gender-based violence to address their needs and have them met, regardless of their immigration status. She has served as a service manager for the London Refugee Service of the British Red Cross. She is currently the Parent Services Programme Manager at Westminster Befriend family. The Mentoring for Mums programme offers mentoring to women with children aged 5 and upwards. They aim to improve well-being, connectedness, and reduce loneliness as they build confidence, developing a growth mindset. Mentoring for Mums Welcome is the flagship programme adapted for the specific needs of asylum-seeking women. Volunteers provide regular social, emotional, and practical support. 2 refugee women support groups were also launched in May 2022. The groups offer a free, relaxed environment for refugee, migrant and asylum-seeking women in Westminster to meet, get to know each other, share stories and offer support to one another. Westminster Befriend Family, the organisation that Maria is from, is an established local charity operating for over 30 years, supporting young people and families at risk of social isolation. In both their Broadening Horizons programme for young people aged 10 to 25 and their Mentoring for Mums programme, they work with skilled, dedicated and trained volunteer mentors who provide regular, sustained support in a goal-focused programme tailored for their needs. Additionally, they run mentoring programmes for refugee and asylum-seeking young people and women in Westminster to provide companionship, connectedness and support while they are adapting to life in their new country. The mentoring programmes are based in positive psychology, supporting good mental health and well-being to develop a growth mindset. Participants determine the focus of their mentoring, and support might include developing healthy family and social relationships, enhancing wellness, access to education and career development, and building important life skills. Their mentors inspire positive change as they nurture trusting and supportive relationships. Combined with a strong network of partners and support services, Westminster Befriend Families mentoring facilitates early intervention for quick access to relevant services, preventing a slide into crisis and enabling young people and families to thrive. We're very lucky to have Maria with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction and the introduction to the work we're doing at Westminster Befriend Family. I really appreciate the work you're doing in Interfaith with the women's group and the opportunity to be here today, and together we can open the discussion and start chatting exactly for what you were saying earlier, the specific challenges that women face in the asylum system. And I can start with I just want to start with the main thing that I think we all need to have in mind when we're talking about that. And from my experience working with women, not only women, is that no one really asks the women what do they want. Nobody asks the women in the asylum system or ensures that there are systems in the place for feedback, or there is mention in the asylum, in the UK asylum system that is sensitive to gender and trauma informed. So I think that's the one and main thing that we all need to be aware of, that we need to create the space in community organizations, in voluntary organizations, but mainly the UK government, when they are putting a system together, a policy system together, that we need to co-produce these policies. We need to co-produce our services with the women involved, because they are the experts by experience. And we both know from our work how important that peer support, how important it is that women offer. So I am going to start talking about, so the women coming. Let me start from saying that women that they are coming from to the UK, they come because they have faced persecution, violence. They are fleeing war, and the fact they face specific risks of exploitation, discrimination, and violence because of their gender. Sorry, you were frozen for a minute. You can see me. So yes, and these specific risks that they face because of their gender is not only risks that they face in their home country, but also in the place that they go to seek refuge. 40% of the overall people that they are seeking asylum worldwide are women. And one of the most widespread global human rights violation is gender-based violence. And that means that women and girls on the move, they face more, they are at more risk of sexual exploitation, physical exploitation, emotional exploitation, more than their male counterparts, especially when they are traveling alone. And we see that this increases when there are periods of emergencies or displacement. And this is what we see unfolding now in Ukraine with the information that they are coming back. Just to give, because I'm talking about gender-based violence, and that's really behind what women face. I want to give a definition of gender-based violence. So gender-based violence includes sexual violence and abuse, forced and child marriage, FGM, the so-called honor-based violence, and can be physical, psychological, sexual, emotional, or material exploitation. In the UK, only in 2020, 3 out of the 7 people that claimed asylum were women. Now, starting talking a little bit more specifically about the UK and how the UK asylum system works. What I would put as one of the main things is that the asylum process seems endless. Unfortunately, it's not as the policy advises. People don't get a decision within the time frame that is advised by the policies. Women and families may wait for years, even a year or more, to have their first interview with the Home Office to show and give evidence about their case. So that means that their lives are being put on hold. They are in limbo. I'll talk about accommodation. Accommodation is a separate issue, but they may be transferring from one location to the other, and they cannot create new routes. They cannot connect with the community, especially when they are single mothers. And having a support network is so important, either with the community or not with the same community that you're coming from, but with other people. Because it just prevents people from accessing education, employment, moving on with their lives. It's really difficult to keep the skills that you come from and you have, and to keep your mental health, your well-being. When women come here, they want to contribute to the community. They want to be part of it. They want to work and they want to thrive. Moving on from that, then added to that is the culture of disbelief. What I have seen is that a lot of women that I have worked with, they have been met by officials with the notion of disbelief, that you're telling me lies, you're lying until you can prove that that you're not, until you give me the evidence that I need. Now, gender-based violence is a protected characteristic under international law, which means that that when fleeing abuse, that is considered as persecution under the Refugee Convention. However, women fleeing from these situations, because of their position and their position and what they have been through, it's really difficult to find this evidence and the threshold, to reach the high threshold that the UK system needs for them to prove their situation and why they fled. Also, this is where it comes when we say that it's really what we really need. We need a very sensitive system in gender and trauma informed, which means that I have seen women that they had to relay information and go into deep details about rape, sexual abuse to a male interviewee from the Home Office. And most of the time, childcare is not organized from the Home Office. So you're in a big room, you have your children play in one corner of the room, and then you have to recount all these very traumatic experiences. And if you're not met with a listening ear, with some empathy so that you're able to open up, then this makes it almost impossible. And when we say trauma-informed, is about creating a safe space for women to open up and be able to talk about what they want, but also understand what trauma does to people, what trauma does to your memory, to your body, on how much time you need to recount information. For example, if someone pauses and thinks and try to put the information together after they have relieved trauma, maybe from the home office, if you don't have that kind of training, it will be like you're lying. You're trying to make up a story in your brain right now. Hopefully I'm not getting into much detail here. Yes, then we are moving into access to safe and appropriate accommodation. And that's an area I have been working for a very long time, for several years. As you said, I was a casework coordinator. And the asylum support system is extremely complex. And we see that people, especially that they don't have the language, and the most vulnerable ones, the ones that they have experienced trauma and exploitation, is really difficult to make the case for themselves. And this is when you need the community organizations. This is when you need the volunteer sector to have an advocate, to have a caseworker, so that you feel safe, you talk to them, and then you have an advocate to talk about you and the specific needs that you have. Accommodation is, just imagine, for everybody, having a place where you feel safe and you think it as home has a detrimental, impact on everything else that is happening in your life, isn't it? So accommodation through the Home Office is offered on a no-choice basis. People may disperse anywhere in the country, regardless of any support networks or community connections. What we see is that people are moved more than once before they have a decision. Initially, they are in temporary accommodation, which at this time looks like hotels. They are in a hotel room, and they should move on within a few weeks from proving to the Home Office that they are destitute. So if someone is destitute, can have access to accommodation. What we see now is that I am working with women that they are in a hotel room with their 6 children and their husband. They are across 2 rooms for a year, and they are still waiting to have the first interview with the Home Office. And unfortunately, that's not the exception. That's the rule. So they don't have access to a kitchen. They don't have a fridge to just put a bottle of milk for their children to give them breakfast. They have 3 meals provided in the hotel. And they are, it's a full board accommodation. However, when that remains as the main form of support for such a prolonged period of time, people lose agency of their lives. You're not able to choose your meal. You're not able to choose what you're going to eat or when you're going to eat. Or you don't have a kitchen or a sink to get water. They're drinking water from the sink in the toilets in the hotel rooms. So accommodation, and then there are the several dispersals, and that has a knock-on effect, as I said earlier, in creating community connections, but also has a knock-on effect on the continuity of care when you're trying to access healthcare. Because you need to change GP a lot of times if you're getting specific support from a hospital, from a specific department, when you're changing county, when you're changing town, city, or even borough. You need to change completely the hospital you have the consultation, you need to change your GP, and that, as we all know, it takes a lot of time, and you need to get back on the system to wait for an appointment. And really, really has an impact in the mental health, in community mental health services. Once the system is overwhelmed, there are long waiting lists. So you may start seeing a professional and working on your trauma, but then if the Home Office moves you, you need to go back down to the list and waiting for a waiting list to restart your sessions. So that's about access to the healthcare system as well. And at that point, I want to talk about homelessness and everyone throughout, while they are waiting for their applications to be decided, they may become homeless at any time. Initially, when you arrive, you need to prove that you're destitute and you need accommodation, and that may take quite of an effort to gather all the evidence from your home country that you don't have access to funds. and prove that you're destitute. And if that takes a few days on arrival to the country, that means that you're going to be homeless during those days. I have worked with young girls, with young women that they have left their families to avoid forced marriage. And although they came from very wealthy families, they were very well educated, they couldn't access their bank accounts, they couldn't even talk to the bank to prove it's really difficult to prove that you don't have access. Sometimes is being asked from them to contact the bank, to get bank statements, to give evidence of why you have been cut off, but then they have the fear that they maybe find out and their families will know where they are. So that creates extra barriers, and this is when you need the independent advocates and the caseworkers. So this is where it comes that if you don't speak the language, if you're not open and used in asking for help in different organizations and volunteer sectors, you don't get any of that support, because it's a system that you really need to advocate and find to meet your personal needs. Of course, there is the extra barrier of legal advice, access to legal advice. We are lucky we're in London because there is a lot of offer in legal aid. But there are cities, there are towns outside of London that there is one legal aid immigration solicitor for a whole region, and people just have to wait and wait until they get immigration advice. And often it comes later on in the case, so they didn't get the opportunity to build their evidence base, to have it translated and give it from the beginning to their home office, which means that they will maybe refuse and they will have to appeal. Maybe they will have to put all the evidence together and do a new application to show, and that means that you're 4 years afterwards, and from going from one stage to the other, you have faced moments of homelessness, periods of homelessness, and the support that it comes to the asylum seekers that they are destitute is they receive, once they are in dispersed accommodation, they receive almost £40 per week, which means that you need to live with £5 per day. They live in accommodation that people don't have to pay the bills or any rent. However, they need to pay for their food, they need to pay for telephone, for internet, for hygiene packs, and £39.70 per week is quite impossible to meet your needs. So the insufficient financial support creates this dependency with food banks, with volunteer organizations, so that they can top up that support. So this is when you have, again, the families, women with children or single women or young girls being dependent on support from several other outlets to meet their daily needs. And we can all imagine what that over the years effect has on the mental health of people. In terms of employment, generally asylum seekers they are not allowed to rent unless they have specific permission, and they are not allowed to work unless they have specific permission. If someone is waiting for over 12 months for a decision from the Home Office, can apply for the right to work. However, they can only access a specific list of occupation, of employment, of jobs that you can do, that includes scientists, ballet dancers, engineers. So is employment that the UK has shortage of, and it's difficult for a lot of people to access that. And the same comes with education, because you would think that while people are waiting, maybe they want to go into courses, maybe they want to go into education, and they want to use that time while they are waiting. But the truth is that people don't have they don't have the same access as everyone else in the UK in higher education. They are classed as international students, and the fees are extremely high, and they are not allowed to apply for a loan, for a student loan. There is some limited funding for ESOL classes that you can access 6 months after you are in the UK, and you can start learning the language.
A couple of things that really strongly, let me know if you can hear me okay, was this idea that the violence doesn't stop when you leave. It follows you in some way, whether that's through a re-traumatizing process of asylum, going through the asylum system, or just the vulnerability of being homeless or, you know, without access to the support that you need. And I think in the women's sector, we have this real kind of slogan, this real core idea of believe women, but, you know, perhaps not every woman gets to be believed.
This is why I think it's so important. It's like a very good point, and the most important point, the one you made. And this is why I specifically believe that it's so important to have the volunteer organizations. Not only offering, it's really important to have casework services that they can advocate women to access the need that they want, but it's equally important to have organizations to offer befriending, to start women support groups, so that women can see that there is a welcoming community. They can connect with the community. They can start building a support network. And you see that people have come from this, you know, they are being disbelieved in their home country where they come here, and then they put the trust in the professionals they meet in the charity sector. And this is when a very important moment that the professional need very tactfully and carefully to pass that trust back to the system so that they can get the support that they need.
Perspective, or from sort of faith and interfaith charities, what do you think are the ways? Is it through befriending and peer support? What are the ways that we can kind of engage better or help refugee women more? How can we engage with refugee women as charities not necessarily in the refugee support sector?
Yeah, I think first of all, coordinating the support that we all offer and talking to each other, you know, is one of the most important things. And this is something that we have been doing in Westminster, coordinating the support of the community groups and the services that are being offered to asylum seekers and refugees. And then obviously bringing our voice together and then gather our evidence, our base of evidence, and advocating through policy, through participating. Of course, there are bigger organizations that they have more resources and they have a built-in system of advocacy and policy making, and they are talking to MPs and they go to the parliament, and just being part of that process of and feel every organization, no matter how big or small, that they can be included, the voices can be included, is really, really important. Any kind of consultation, keep on pushing for the UK government to ensure that there is a system that puts women and children and vulnerable people in the heart of what they are doing. The new immigration, the immigration borders bill, the motto is that we want the system to be fair for everyone, and we want to make sure that the most vulnerable are getting the support. But I really struggle to see anything in that bill that ensures that there is a system of feedback of women being asked of any focus group or any survey that needs to happen, so that women are being consulted on what they think of the system, or anything mentioning really in that bill that they want to look at making the system gender sensitive and trauma informed. I don't like that a lot of the time women are being presented only as vulnerable, voiceless, sidelined. You know, this is how the system makes them feel, and this is how they're being presented. But what I have seen from my experience is a powerhouse of women, that they are so resilient and they persevere and they support their families, they support their children, they manage to rebirth from their experiences, and they want to support other women. So it's about creating the UK government creating a health and needs assessment the moment that the woman applies for asylum. So you know from day one what are the needs and how can we meet them of each individual, rather than having to engage advocates and caseworkers to keep on sending letters and reports from medical professionals to prove what each individual...
When a woman enters into a peer support group or into a mentoring relationship, what impact do you see that having on her?
It is really amazing, the change that you see in women. So at this point, I need to say that we are working in Westminster in the hotels that they are being considered temporary accommodation for asylum seekers. So in these hotels, you have your room, which you can think, oh, wow, you're in a hotel room, that's amazing. But then think about living for a year in a hotel room with your whole family. There are no communal spaces. And people receive £8 per person per week. So they cannot afford travel or visiting other parts of London or going out at all. So we see that people are isolated, they are lonely, they are trapped in their thoughts, and they are really dependent in this kind of initiatives of women's group, of how can we bring women out and connect with each other, because we don't want them to connect with us. We want to be the facilitator of the women to come together and start talking to each other. And it's just a magic moment when I am on our women's group and I see women talking to each other, sharing ideas. One of them had their big interview with the Home Office, the substantive interview, and she came in and she started talking to everyone and telling them how the building looks, how she felt, how the environment was, where she left her children, and everybody was listening, you know, and was getting that kind of information that they can't get from anyone else. But it's not only that, is about the sentiment that you are not alone. You have more women, because people feel marginalized, people feel left out. The UK's integration process starts when someone gets settled status, when their status is recognized and accepted. But until that moment, someone may have been 7 years in the UK, that they don't have the opportunities that they should have to participate and integrate. So that is what happens, and bringing women together. And I see that apart from our women's group, now that it's summer, there is a sort of a garden, a big garden next to the hotel. So at 6 o'clock, all the women with the children, no matter where they're from, what language they are talking, they're just going there and they're just talking to each other, and they are making jokes, and is bitter and is difficult, everything they are facing. But they are all women. They are, most of them, mothers. They can understand each other, they can feel each other. And that is empowering. That boosts your confidence. Of course, everybody has complex needs, and I don't want to undermine the importance of having caseworkers, having organizations that they offer casework, but also having organizations like ours that they are offering this kind of space for people to feel normal and have friends and have a chat and have a cup of tea and have a volunteer mentor that comes and takes you out every week from the hotel and you walk around. And as yourselves, we are very good connected with good partnerships with the libraries and the community centers. So we bring them in to be part of their new home, temporarily, of course, because we never know when someone is going to be moved. So yeah, I see the change from one session to the other. But equally, it's not easy to get women out of the hotel, because someone, when is in the midst of their trauma, their mental health is deteriorating, they are quite depressed, they just don't really have the motivation, they don't have the energy, they just think that that's it, I'm here, I'm staying here. So it really takes effort to support everybody, and this is where the peer support comes, and one woman knocking the door of the other, and it's like, let's go out now. Let's go to the group, it's Friday.
Exactly. Well, I mean, you know, and they're the people who know what each other need. I wanted to ask you sort of about your own kind of journey into doing this work, and what do you find kind of the most challenging aspects of doing the work that you do with these women and families, and supporting them?
Maeve, this is a very, very good question. This is a very and timely question. This is something that we have been talking a lot in my environment and my workplaces. There is so much goodwill, and everybody who goes in this work, really they go because they want to offer back, and that's myself as well. You have this sense of responsibility that you feel on your shoulders, and you want to know that what you're doing, even slightly, is supporting other people in the community, is supporting people not to be discriminated and sidelined. But over the years in the sector, I have seen brilliant professionals, brilliant people being burnt out. And that's something that must be thought a little bit better from the volunteer sector for organizations, that all the workers, all the people working, they are being exposed to vicarious trauma, that second degree trauma. Day in, day out, you come across and you listen to very traumatic experiences. You don't want to go into details. That's not our job. We don't want to re-traumatize people. Always, each organization works on a need-to-know basis. But when you build connections and you're working with someone for 1 year, you know the stories. You read, they open up. They want to talk to someone. And this is when the sector is really busy right now. There is so much need, and the volunteer sector is doing the best they can to meet that need. But what I see is that people, that they are being burned out, and they don't have clinical supervision offered by their organizations. They don't have psychosocial support, one-to-one support from professionals, so they can cope with the mental burden of these jobs. So I would say the biggest challenge is to know as a professional how to put boundaries and how to cope with vicarious trauma. And that's another big conversation.
That connects to another question I was going to ask you, which is what are the changes you've seen during your time doing this work? Do you think that's just overwhelming need, or sort of increased of the crisis?
Yeah. I was thinking last night about that question. I thought that you may ask me about that, and I was quite it's very sad to say that I have seen that people ask the same thing again and again, and that means that there are no changes. You know, yeah. People ask for safe accommodation. People ask for money, enough money to afford food, enough money to afford a nappy. Yesterday, one of the women in the hotel called me and she told me, it's my is my daughter's birthday. She's 3 years old tomorrow. I need to give her a cake, but I don't have money. You know, I have £6, but the cake in Sainsbury's is, sorry, in the supermarket is £12. And it's just so sad that just people want to provide for their children. And they want the basics. And as I was for 4 years a casework coordinator, and I was doing this advocacy, and I saw that the needs of people are the same again and again. The system changes. Organizations are advocating on a policy level, because there is the front line, and then you feed in the policy and advocacy team, you create reports, and then you feed it back to the stakeholders. What I have seen that I can say is positive is that councils and communities are more open to create meetings where all the community organizations can come together and talk about what they see in the front line and take the feedback back. What happens with that feedback? Haven't still seen it working. Maybe on a case-to-case basis, you manage, you know, if you have a specific case and you talk to someone, maybe they can resolve it. But the problem is systemic. So yeah, I see more meetings with stakeholders and more organizations being invited, and effort for coordination. But practically on the issues and the problems that people face, I would say that the pandemic has made things even worse.
Yes. And we're hearing that from, you know, so many parts of our sector, aren't we, in the charity sector? What's the sort of the one thing that you wish people knew about the refugee experience, or the experience of refugee women?
I have to be honest with you that I find the public being very sympathetic and very aware through my years. You know, the will from people that they were not very familiar with refugee issues, they were not volunteering, they were not part of organizations. They were just calling and saying, I want to help. What do you need? Opening their houses. There are so many hosting schemes that they support people coming out of homelessness, building their case, getting back to the system. So I do think that the public and from my experience, people are aware of what is happening, and they are really opening their homes and their lives, and they really want to support. It's just about having in our minds that we are all normal people. They are just normal people. You know, the label of asylum seeker, it takes the identity out of a person. You know, I was talking with an asylum seeker yesterday. She's not an asylum seeker. She's a swimming instructor in her country. I was talking to someone who was a teacher, a math teacher in her country, and she had to flee. So it's about the labels and what that label unconsciously brings in our mind. So just be aware that things can come very close and become reality to us, as we see now with the war in Europe.
Yes, we'll be sharing some links when we share the video. You can go for more information about the work you're doing at Westminster Befriend a Family and others working in this crucial area, and find ways to get involved. Thank you so much for sharing your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.